welcome back to the Rebel Nutritionist podcast. Today, I have Amanda with me. Yay, another exciting podcast with Amanda Schuh, our amazing integrative health coach.
Thank you.
One of our amazing integrative health coaches. So today we are going to be talking all about inflammation. We get lots of questions all the time, every day, about inflammation. And so I feel like I may have addressed this way early on, but I'm super excited. We're almost to 200 episodes.
Oh my gosh.
Wow. I mean, getting there, right? So I feel like we, first of all, information's always coming out. It's always ever evolving. And I really want to take this opportunity to explain a little bit more about inflammation. Not so much the science of it, because we all know how much I love the science, but you guys don't always necessarily want to hear the science behind it. But really try and have you guys understand what inflammation truly is inside your body. I often say if your skin is clear, if our skin was clear, not that it is, if it was clear, then we would take much better care of our bodies because we'd see what's going on the inside. And so inflammation happens on the inside. We don't always feel it. Sometimes we do. We can't always, know that it's happening. It could be happening on I would say in this smoldering fire kind of way, on a very low level, then it slowly accumulates. And then by the time it gets to the point where we really notice it, it's sort of a little, far down the pike. I don't want to say too late, but other things have happened. So welcome, Amanda.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Always. I always like having conversations, with you. I mean, we always have such great conversations. But rather than even doing them myself, because then I feel like I'm talking to a wall half the time, there's nobody there to say, yes, let's bounce this. And I feel like the dialogue is great, and we've gotten some great questions from listeners. So thank you for responding to my my request yesterday. I think I asked you guys to send it in, so we've gotten some good questions there. So without further ado, let's talk about what is inflammation and why do we need to pay attention to it, and what do we need to, what can we do about it, and how, the what and the how. So the point of today's conversation is also to give you some really great takeaways of what are the small things you can be doing in your life to make really, really big changes. So let's get started. So let's talk about what inflammation is. And just so you know, I want to let you guys know that inflammation is pretty much at the root of just about, I can unequivocally say at the root of 95% of the diseases, if not all of them. Okay. And so why can I say that? Because when we find a condition, whether it's an autoimmune condition, whether it's diabetes, whether it's cancer, whether it's GI issues, colitis or irritable bowel or inflammatory bowel disease or all of those kinds of things, brain diseases, Alzheimer's, cognitive decline, dementia, all of those things have their beginnings, their root in the inflammation process. That's where it begins. And so where does inflammation come from? So here's what I want you to know. The body will only respond and cause inflammation to happen when there is a trigger. And the only two things that trigger inflammation, let's say from an immune perspective, because that's really what drives inflammation, is a trigger to the immune system, if you will, would be, the first thing would be overt trauma, like you fall and break a bone, you get a laceration, a cut, right? You get a blow to the head, like trauma to the body, a physical cut, a physical injury. You're in a car accident, God forbid, right? Something like that. You fall off your bike, you fall down, right? Those kinds of things are physical trauma. And when physical trauma happens, the body responds and it creates inflammation in a protective way. Right, it's trying to protect you from damage, and or from something coming inside your body. So that's one way, a physical manifestation, right? Then there is a pathogen or a bacteria or a virus, some kind of foreign invader, if you will. It could be a bacteria, it could be a virus, it could be any other kind of foreign body, right, that enters your system. It could be a toxin. It could be heavy metals, right, which is part of a toxin. So chemicals that come into your body that is a foreign invader, your immune system has to respond to. So let's talk about what actually happens then. So think about it when you get a cut, right? So if you have an injury, a physical injury, and you get cut, think about what happens on the surface of your skin. If you get a cut, it starts to bleed. And so it starts to bleed, and so we don't want to bleed to death, and the body has a beautiful way of protecting us. It forms a clot. So think about when that clot forms, what's happening? Well, the clot is forming, your skin around that area, let's say it's on your hand, right? I'm holding up my finger for those of you that can't see. So if you get a cut on your hand, that area around your cut is going to get inflamed. You're going to see the clot start to form. It's going to get red. And you may actually, at some point later on down the road, have some pain, right? Because what's happening, your immune system now is getting triggered to protect you, from it gets swollen because now all of these white blood cells are going to the area to form like this barrier so you don't get an infection from that cut, right? So your white blood cells, which is your immune system, is going to that cut. They're going to the cut so it protects you from getting any bacteria from the cut, from the bacteria trying to come in from that open wound. So that's where that inflammation comes from. And the red, because there's so much activity going on there that it's red, it's hot. And so, and then it forms that scar. And then we go about our day and everything's fine and all is good, right? And then we don't give it a second thought about what the immune system is doing. So that's like an inflammation response on the outside of our body. And then it takes some time for it to go down and the immune system does what it does and everything is back to normal. Well, what I want you to think about now is internal inflammation, the stuff that really causes damage. Think about the inside of your artery, all right? The inside of your artery is supposed to be very smooth and blood is supposed to flow through that artery in a very easy way, right? Blood is supposed to be thin enough, it goes through, it doesn't get stuck. And so when your body encounters a bacteria, when your body encounters a toxin, when there's too much sugar running through your blood, when there's too much cortisol or adrenaline running through your system, those things in excess are not supposed to be left over in the blood. They're supposed to go to an organ, go to a tissue where they need to do their job, and then they go back, everything goes back to normal. They recede. So what happens when the inflammation process starts is those things are in the blood now much too long. Sugar is in the blood too long. A toxin or a heavy metal like mercury is in the blood too long. Or chemicals. I mean, it could be even, something in the environment. It could be chemicals like fragrances from candles or air fresheners, like those kinds of things. Even so, oils, like your unhealthy processed oils, all of those things have to get broken down in the body. And when they're in the blood, they actually act like sandpaper. That's the best way that I can give you that visual analogy. So think about sandpaper constantly running up against those smooth arteries. After a while, what happens? Those arteries start to bleed because it's like, just think about, like, if you, like I'm cringing just thinking about running sandpaper over your fingers over and over and over and over. Mm-hmm. And now it's going to start to bleed and you have damage. So think about the inside of your arteries, and this could be the inside of your arteries. It could also be on an organ. When there's an onslaught of all these foreign things near your liver, on your liver, or, because the liver has to process, or near your pancreas, or in your stomach, right, in your intestinal system, all of these foreign objects of you, right, foreign bodies that should be in the areas that they're supposed to be, those foreign bodies are now scraping against that blood vessel and causing it to bleed. So very much, and they're just micro tears. We're not talking like bleeding like you just sliced open an artery, right? We're talking about these small micro tears. But when there is a tear in a blood vessel or in an organ, now the immune system has to respond. So very much like what I just described was the process on the outside when you get a cut, that's what's going on the inside. right? So now we're developing scar tissue. Now we're developing, when you think about a clot on the outside of your body, now you think about it in your arteries, and you're forming these clots. And oh, by the way, when you start to bleed on the inside of your artery, one of the first protective mechanisms, obviously the immune system's going to come to the rescue, but the best adhesive, if you will, that we have that also acts like an antioxidant, so it's protective, is cholesterol. So cholesterol is going to go to that area of damage and start to create that clot. So for everybody who thinks that cholesterol is the bad guy and we always want to take a statin to drop down our cholesterol, cholesterol is the innocent bystander in all of this. Cholesterol is actually protecting you from bleeding to death. And so, more or less, right, in that analogy. So if we think about, well, what's in that clot? Well, we have some of those white cells, and we have the cholesterol, and then we have other kinds of fats that come in to plug up those holes, if you will. So now this is where the beginnings of coronary artery disease, right, cardiovascular disease starts. If you have too many things in the system, too many substances, again, it's not just fat, it's not just cholesterol. Remember, cholesterol is the good guy here. Those other fats end up sticking to the artery wall or stick to, again, the liver and fatty liver disease. We have so much, we have so many other things that are bombarding the liver that all of those chemicals, toxins, fats, undigested food, whatever it is now causing injury to the liver, and everything, that fat is going to build a layer over because it's trying to protect it, right? So that is the best analogy that I can give you, right? That this is how inflammation starts. And then the immune system it still has to protect the body. And if you are still continuing to expose yourself to these toxins and to these problematic, whether it's problematic foods or there's a virus running rampant, you're exposed to a virus again, this process just continues and continues. And we know it really gets triggered. Too much sugar, too many of those processed fat, like processed foods are part of that trigger that is that sandpaper. And so remember, like I said, processed foods and adrenaline and toxins, like I don't want to be redundant, but I really want you guys to understand that inflammation doesn't just pop out of the blue. So that gives you a sense of now what's happening on the inside of your body. So when we talk about inflammation, that's what we're talking about. Right? And that's why your body gets red and hot, because you've got, imagine this happening in many different systems, and even in your brain. If it's happening in your brain, oh, well, there's brain fog and memory issues. Like all of these things are correlated to this inflammation.
And probably more so like a chronic inflammation situation.
Exactly, right? We're not talking about something acute, which is just short term. Mm-hmm. But again, it's this chronic exposure to all of these substances that can potentially harm the body. Mm-hmm. So how was that for an explanation?
No, I think you explained it really well. Just to see it from those two standpoints, like on your skin, what happens, and the scab and the white blood cells and everything that comes into place to try to protect yourself, and then inside, how that wound is just like that sandpaper, just scraping away in there. Right. And I love that cholesterol is the good guys, because cholesterol is just getting
it gets such a bad rap.
Such a bad rap.
Yes. And we will address it. I'm super excited because in one of our next podcasts, we're going to be talking with Dr. Joel Kahn, and we're going to talk all about that from a cardiologist, an integrative cardiologist. So that'll be great. Even though the cholesterol myth has been debunked for many, many years, but yet again, every day we're faced with this conversation because people come in on cholesterol medicine and they always say, oh, my doctor's going to yell at me if I'm not on cholesterol medication. Like that's a whole other conversation, but cholesterol is the good guy. It just so happens to be that it's one of the markers that they were able to make a drug for. So, that's the story of that. We can go off on that tangent, but so for the listeners, was that a good enough an explanation? Is there anything that's leaving you like, wait, but I still don't understand?
No, I think I understand that.
Okay.
I do.
Good.
Yeah. I also think, like, if you think about it, like the chronic inflammation piece, how there's just like maybe a little flame, and then you're just kind of sprinkling it every day, getting hits with like a little bit of gasoline here, a little bit, and then that flame ignites, and then here we have disease, right? So I think thinking about it from that standpoint, it's usually not just one thing. It's this, you know, many hits, many offenders over the course of however many years before it starts to be the onset of something we're now going to label as a disease.
100%. And I appreciate you saying that, because the other thing is that inflammation doesn't just pop up overnight. So it's this low flame, right? Think of your if you have a gas burner, right? You have this low flame. Yet if you keep feeding that flame, you're going to turn up, you're going to turn up, you're going to turn up to the point where now we're detecting it on blood tests and we're seeing it in your body and you're feeling it in your joints. But by the time you've gotten to that, it is significant, right? And it's causing damage. It is causing damage to the inside of your body, and it does come from many things, which is why I was giving so many examples, right? So here's the thing. If you are that person, you know, caffeine will trigger adrenaline release from the adrenal glands, right? Adrenaline, cortisol, those things at high levels. Remember, they're protective in small amounts. They protect us. They're a survival mechanism. But in high amounts, when you're overdosing on the caffeine, when you are now stressed and you're producing more adrenaline, and you have a sugary breakfast, and you haven't slept well, and you're not moving your body and exercising. Oh, and the foods that you're eating, you know, you're eating high-fat foods, processed foods, all of those things, individually and collectively, will contribute to that inflammation. Again, it's like, it's a strike here, and it's a strike there, and it's a strike there. Well, again, you get enough of those, and boom, you're gonna have that explosion.
Yeah. Well, that reminds me, I guess, to ask you in terms of, you mentioned like testing. Right? So like, explain to the listeners what type of markers you look for that's kind of unique in the realm of functional medicine versus, you know, their practitioner that they can go to.
Great question. So in functional medicine, remember, the idea is we're getting to root cause. It's always about what started this fire. Okay. And we go back and say, okay, well, was it some kind of trigger from, you know, was there a virus? Was there a bacteria? And that's what we really want to get to. And we can look at things. So, and these are definitely functional tests. You're not going to find them routinely. You may find one of them. One of the ones that we do is C-reactive protein, HS, high sensitivity C-reactive protein. C-reactive protein is one of those inflammation markers that we know when we see it and it's above 1, there's inflammation going on. And oftentimes, now there's some, you know, data to this. What I'm going to tell you from an anecdotal, and it's really more than anecdotal, I will say it's clinical because I see this day in, day out. When we see an elevated C-reactive protein, oftentimes it is a result of stress, right? Whether it's emotional stress, whether it's physical stress, that is the correlation that I, as a clinician, have been able to make. Like, it is pretty clear C-reactive protein is linked in some way to that, right? And then there's certain inflammatory markers that are triggered from that. So HSCRP, myeloperoxidase is another one. Myeloperoxidase is a measure of that immune response, those white blood cells that are going to that area to protect you. So the higher the myeloperoxidase, the more immune activation there is. Okay? And so when we see immune activation, well, why is the immune system on overdrive, right? And then we look at things called, I even look at something called ADMA. It is a measure of what's going on inside those the artery walls. And, you know, how much nitric oxide is the body producing. Nitric oxide is a very potent component of keeping those blood vessels nice and supple, right? That they're bendable, that they're flexible. And so it's important that we are measuring that. We also look at oxidized LDL. Oxidized LDL is telling us what is going on with the fats in your blood. Are those fats being oxidized or damaged, if you will, by a chemical from the air? Are they being damaged by bad fats, right? Those seed oils can cause oxidation of those fats. And when that oxidation happens, it's almost like this explosion of these fat particles, and that's not good. And then they get inflamed. And so we look at oxidized LDL. We look at something called Lp(PLA), and that is also, again, what's going on in the arteries, what is going on there. And of course, we look at the cardiovascular markers. Lp(a) is another marker. It is a specific cardiovascular marker, but Lp(a), which is not always tested for, even by cardiologists, and not tested for by your doctor, and Joel Kahn will actually speak to this. There's some great research out now on Lp(a) being related to the aortic, the plaque that forms in the aortic artery, right? And so that's a problem. You don't want that big artery, important artery, starting to get closed off. So those are some of the markers that we look at that are really indicative specifically of inflammation. Where is it, originating, and how do we want to target that?
Yeah.
Some of the other things that we do measure, cortisol, we measure. Homocysteine is a mark, so cortisol comes from stress. Homocysteine is what we call a methylation marker. It's one of our genetic markers that we validate with, and homocysteine is also a cardiovascular marker, but it does show inflammation. The other thing that's interesting to know is that we measure iron, we measure ferritin, iron, and when we see very, very high levels of iron, that also can indicate inflammation in the body. Because the body will there's a whole, again, won't get into the biochemistry of that, but I can tell you, when we see very high, abnormally high levels of iron, if it's not, let's say, hemochromatosis, which is a genetic disorder, then we're looking at inflammation as well. So we have many areas to validate where is inflammation, where is it coming from, and how do we sort of target that.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's helpful to hear from how there's so many different markers to go off of, instead of just maybe one or two one-offs that you get, and it doesn't really tell the full picture.
Right. So part of what I should have said in the beginning, the conversation, maybe I'll have to go back and change the intro, but inflammation, and also inflammation, one of the questions we get is what we'll call inflamm-aging. Inflammation as related to aging. So what happens is when we have a lot of inflammation in the body, it will accelerate 100% the aging process. I'm going to talk about a quick story because I have a client, and kind of drills in the point that if a little is good, more is not always better. Okay. So I have a client that recently retested. So he came in, and he's young, he's in his late 20s. He tested, his inflammation markers were great, right? And he's been doing the sauna, and he's been doing cold plunging. His diet's great. He's doing meditation. Like, he's really putting into practice a lot of these really good lifestyle and diet and nutritional habits. And yet we tested him, and his inflammation markers were crazy high.
Interesting.
Well, guess what we know? Too much cold plunging, too much exposure to heat can be stressful on the body. So a little bit of stress is good, right? That's what cold plunging is. Cold plunging is this stress on the body that's now it's supposed to create a resilient effect, that you stress the body a little bit, and then it goes back to normal, and it learns this sort of new resilience factor, so you become a little tougher, if you will. But when you're doing this day in, day out for a long period of time, and your life is a little stressed, or a little stressful, and you're perhaps indulging a little bit too much alcohol or too much sugar, now that cold plunge is going to become more inflammatory because your body is overly stressed. And so this is what I think is going on, because everything else being equal looked great. And I looked at him and I'm like, I think you are doing too much of this. So check back with us in about 6 weeks. I told him to pull back on all of that.
Interesting.
And we've made just a few changes, but really it was just to the cold plunging and some of the heat stuff that he was doing every day, right? And I think both of those things back to back for his body, I'm not saying necessarily for everybody, but for his body, were too much. And this is why doing the testing is so important, because you think you're doing something beneficial, and yet it's going to end up hurting you in the long run. And I think we have to be so careful, because we are such a culture of, if a little is good, more is better, If a little is good, a lot must be better. And we've really got to get out of that. And that's where social media is doing us such an injustice, because we're just preaching and preaching and preaching, and yet we're not taking into account our own body's response. Yeah. What is our individual response to that? So, albeit to say that as you really detect this inflammation, it is going to accelerate aging, even though your goal is longevity, right? So we have to be very careful. All of these longevity people that are doing all of these things, pardon my expression, balls to the walls, like, you got to really pay attention to what is happening inside your own body. So, and inflammation left unchecked for a long period of time will just destroy the cells in your body. So, if your goal is to try and age gracefully, like, if you don't get that inflammation under control and you don't know about it, everything you do after the fact of that is going to be sort of an effort and futility, because you're robbing Peter to pay Paul kind of thing,
Interesting.
So, yeah.
Well, and I think it goes to, back to what you said about just the influence that, like, the world we live in, where there's so much information at our fingertips. And, it goes back to this idea of bio-individuality, that we are all unique bio-individuals, right? And, for some, maybe doing too much of that is throwing them into this inflammatory state. And for others, maybe it's doing the opposite. But I think it goes back to, like, this is what we do in this practice, is really customize an approach for you based on what we're seeing with your unique body. Right?
Well, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah. So, and I think that's where we really have to pay attention to that and say, I don't care what AI can do. I don't care, right? All of the books out there. Yes, the information is great. But if you don't know how to take that information and apply it in your own body and then be able to validate it.
Right, exactly.
If you're not validating that what you're doing is working or not working, then how do you know? Right? And if we have the tools to do that, then what's your excuse for not? It's almost like, why, are you better off for it, right? We think we're doing all of these positive things, but are we really better off for what it is that we are doing? And I think that's where that bio-individuality, right? Because how I'm going to respond to something is going to be different than how you are, right? And my resilience is different than yours, depending upon how much you slept and the food you're eating and how much you've moved your body. And so all of those things, and Amanda, I really want, so diet is important. Amanda's going to talk about that, but don't forget, genetics is also really important. When we look at your DNA and we can sort of see the trajectory and the predispositions of where inflammation may be triggered from or what's happening, that is also super beneficial, because now you know and you can target those specific areas that can help you support that. So let's talk a little bit about what we've got in, let's call it the other pillars, if you will, that can help us manage the inflammation and what we need to pay attention to.
From a coach's standpoint, I have the great fortune of having, very a good amount of time in sessions with clients. So we have about 45 minutes a week, and we can really hone in on these pillars and see where they're at, right? I usually always start off like our foundational coaching session with going through the 6 pillars, okay? So movement, nutrition, sleep, stress management, relationships, environment, and what was the other one? What did I miss? Mental, emotional. And so, oftentimes the driving force behind, maybe some sort of labs that are a little wonky and some high inflammation markers are there some imbalances here in these pillars. Yes. So we always go through and identify what it is, where they're starting from, and areas that we can improve. So I think fundamentally, a good place to start for everybody on a universal level is nutrition, because it's, I feel like, kind of the easiest in a way. And we know eating an anti-inflammatory diet based on tons and tons of research, and we could share some articles with you here on the Mediterranean diet and anti-inflammatory diets, but that's a really good place to start. And actually, it reminds me of there was a question that came in yesterday that asked, what are anti-inflammatory foods? So I'll answer that, because I feel like that's a question that many people have. So when I think about anti-inflammatory foods, first of all, I think about plants. a wide variety of plants, lots of color, lots of diversity. Berries, wild blueberries are so nutritious and dense in nutrients. I think about healthy fats from like seeds and nuts, healthy oils if you're consuming oils like the avocado oil, your extra virgin olive oil. And I think about, wild caught salmon, sardines, those type of foods when I think about anti-inflammatory foods. Is there anything on that list that you would add?
Well, I want to maybe just expand on some of that, right? Because you're 100% correct on all of that. I think what I want to differentiate in the nut and seed category is that nuts have, they're anti-inflammatory, but they have a high amount of omega-6s, right? And omega-6s are important. We need a balance of omega-6 and omega-3s, right? We want more omega-3s than omega-6s. I feel like a lot of people have high omega-6s because if you're eating oils, if you're eating canola oil, which you should not be eating, or processed sunflower oil, safflower oil, those vegetable oils, they create a high amount of omega-6s, right? And so to balance that out with the omega-3s, your seeds, sunflower seeds, sesame seeds, pumpkin seeds, chia seeds, flax seeds, right? All of those seeds are high in omega-3s. So we definitely want to make sure, hemp seeds, right? We definitely want to make sure we're getting a nice balance of those seeds and maybe a little bit erring towards the seeds, a little bit, balance of the nuts to the seeds and erring a little bit towards the seeds because they're easy to throw in, right? Like chia seed, you can make a nice chia pudding. Flax, same thing, you can put it in just about anything. I put it in like everything, sauces, whatever. Nobody knows it's in there. Hemp seeds you could throw on a salad. Pumpkin seeds, you can toast any of these. Sesame seeds that you throw, not sesame, sesame seeds you can throw in with any of your greens. And that will actually, any seed, especially sesame seed with a green, with, I have a dog here who's scratching. I hope we can't hear him. But sesame seeds with like a green, with a leafy green, with broccoli will help enhance the calcium absorption. So for those of you who are looking to also double duty on that osteopenia thing, bone health, right? That is a really, really super way to do that. But so that would be a little bit about the nuts and seeds. And fish overall should be wild caught no matter what kind of fish. And I think we have to be really, really careful with fish because so many fish now have so many heavy metals, right? We're looking at mercury. If you're eating tuna, people, we see this all day long. I measure this. Tuna, stay away from the tuna. Stay away from these big, big fish. Sea bass is another one. Halibut is another one. Grouper is a big one that has mercury. So, and we get a lot of that in Florida. So even if it's wild caught, you still will be exposed to mercury. And mercury is one of those things that's going to act like sandpaper on your blood vessels. Not only that, mercury hangs out in your organs. It's going to hang out in your brain. It's going to hang out in your liver. It's going to hang out in your kidney. It's going to hang out in your pancreas. Like it goes in and it just sits there. And it causes all of this inflammation. So you've got to pay attention to your fish. So the Environmental Working Group, ewg.org, we'll put it in the show notes. We've talked about this on many, many podcast episodes. I will reiterate it again, ewg.org. Great resource. They have a seafood guide. Go check out that guide because it will list the seafood in order of best options to worst, okay? So make sure you're looking at that. So those were the only additions I think I wanted to add.
Yeah, and I think we underestimate the power of plants. And we just don't consume enough plants. Nope. And I will say, even though I do a pretty good job, more recently I've been juicing and focusing more on getting in more of those leafy greens. And I tell you, I've noticed such a shift in how I feel with energy and just like overall well-being. And I'll tell you, it does require work, but it's doable work, and I think a good way to get those servings, that serving 9 to 13 cups a day, seems like a lot, but you really can make a robust, beautiful salad every day. And a juice is such a good place to get
you're still getting the value of the nutrients, right?
Exactly.
People will argue, there's no fiber in the juice. You don't always need the fiber. You're still getting a lot of nutrients in these juices. So as long as you're getting a balance, you will get enough fiber.
Well, and here's what's interesting. So Chris beat cancer. He's a
Amazing.
public speaker. He's written a book. He's healed his cancer 20 years ago and started a movement about it. And he talks a lot about juicing and that he juiced a lot when he was going through cancer treatment. And I thought to myself, why do we wait to the point of disease, to the point where our body is so inflamed, to start to take a proactive approach to consuming all of these fruits and vegetables on a large scale? Why don't we do that as prevention, right? So so it just had me thinking about that, it's just we wait till the brink of disease before we're like, oh crap, we need to make a change here.
Right.
But what if we all just did it on a prevention level? And then, it just, anyway, that was just
one
of those thoughts on my
right.
walk,
I mean, we talk about it all the time. I always say prevention isn't sexy, right? People don't, we don't value prevention in this culture. And that's the problem, right? If you look at the Eastern cultures, Chinese medicine and the Indian, some of the real Ayurvedic practices, it's all about prevention. Yeah. But we are just like, let's just beat our bodies up until we're really, really sick, and then we'll pay attention. And sometimes it's too little too late. Yeah. And, or you have to undergo treatments or whatever. And those are costly and time consuming and exhausting, and they affect your quality of living. Totally. So why do we wait, right? Great question. And that is the $1 million question.
I know, right? So nutrition is one of the pillars. Another pillar is movement, right? We live sedentary lifestyles. We're working from home. We're sitting at our desk, and by the time it's 6 o'clock, we're tired and we don't want to move our bodies. Yes. But we know that movement is so integral to our well-being, and even just there's so many studies out there about just movement alone and how that just lowers inflammation markers. And one of the studies that I pulled was a 12-week yoga practice done in India, and they compared two groups, one that just focused on some dietary changes and one that implemented yoga plus dietary changes. And this was for a whole group of people who had metabolic disease. They had metabolic dysfunction. Okay, so they were already seeing the negative impacts of chronic inflammation in their body. And the study found that those who were implementing a yoga-based intervention for 12 weeks, just 12 weeks, committing to some sort of breath work, some sort of humming, chanting, mindfulness practice, some stretching, just that in and of itself lowered most of their markers. I mean, that to me is like, proof in the pudding, and so there is something to making time in your day despite the chaos, despite the craziness, and that is stuff that I work on personally with clients to help them, because a lot of the time it's the lack of movement that if we just help them kind of get over that curve a little bit, then it yields really nice success for them.
Well, and I like the study too, because it wasn't like hardcore hit movement, right? Like exactly. We all think movement has to be, I'm in the gym busting my ass. Now, being in the gym or lifting, right, resistance work, it doesn't have to be in the gym. It could be on a beach, it could be in your garage, it could be in your room, right? Doing some kind of resistance training is tremendously impactful. Yes, it's helpful for inflammation. Yes, it's helpful for so many other things. But we're not even talking about that. We're saying a little bit of yoga, a little bit of stretching, a little bit of mindful work, a little bit of this all-encompassing way of just moving your body had a huge, profound impact on inflammation markers. Isn't that a thing? So for those of you that are out there saying, I can't move, I can't do this, you're going to have to make a little bit of time, because we do know it is that impactful.
Well, and I think what you said is really important too, that you can over work out, you can overtrain, and that actually
we see that
we do, and that actually has the opposite effect, right? It causes the inflammation to be really high, and we saw somebody yesterday who had really high C-reactive protein levels, and there's somebody who overtrains.
Yes.
And so there's that too.
Yes, and that's what I'm saying. We think if a little is good, more is better, and that's not always the case. I mean, this is why I also think if you're an athlete, if you're training for Ironmans, if you're biking, if you're running, if you're swimming, if you're lifting, and you are doing this hardcore multiple days a week, you've got to get those markers checked, right? Because yes, we talk about how great exercise is, But over exercising is a real thing. And we see this, and especially with women who are doing, shout out to whoever's doing a hot yoga class, and then you're doing these hot HIIT workouts and, inside a hot room. Oh my God, you're stressing out your adrenals more than I can't even explain how detrimental that will be. I'm not even saying could be. I am telling you that will be detrimental over time. Your adrenals will get so burned out from being in that hot room and then adding workout after workout. Like, that's dangerous. But even doing multiple workouts without recovery, you have to have recovery. Your body has to have a chance to recover. To think that we could just go and not have recovery, and then consume caffeine and not sleep, and right, like all of these things that become cumulative in your body will lead to inflammation. So as much as you think you're doing good for yourself, like, take a check, check yourself. Like, are you really doing the right things? And it's not, I'm not saying everything in moderation. I think that's a poor statement, because I don't believe in that. But I believe that we do need some moderation with our exercise, because 0 is not good and too much is not good. We don't want to be at the extreme. Somewhere in the middle for what works for your body is important, right? Like, I'm working out just about every day, but I have recovered. Like, for me, walking is a recovery day, right? So I'm still moving my body, but I'm not like going crazy. And so it's knowing how your body responds to exercise and what that looks like. So yes.
Yeah. And then it goes back to, and then, thinking about another pillar in terms of like stress and stress management, right? Yes. Obviously we know stress is a killer, and we are very stressed in our culture. But just carving out time to find some sort of practice every day, doesn't even have to be a very extensive practice, could be 5 minutes of going outside first thing in the morning and having bare feet on the grass, has profound impacts on inflammation. And it's really, if you think about it, it's like you're recharging your batteries. Like, there's electrical charge in the earth. It's like you recharge your phone battery, you recharge your computer battery. God forbid you leave the house without it, right? And your phone dies. So thinking about it from that perspective, like, okay, how do I recharge my batteries today? I'm going to go outside 5 to 10 minutes every morning, and I'm just going to let my feet touch. Even if you're drinking your coffee, you could be habit stacking. You could be on a call, whatever it is. Ideally, you're not on a call. You're out there being present and mindful, but you just carve that time out, and that has profound impacts just in that, and it's so simple.
So let's talk about grounding, because I think that is so important. So we're talking about grounding is the process of putting your feet on Mother Nature. So it is in the dirt, on the grass. It is at the beach. It's at the park. I don't care. It's something on Mother Earth. It's in a body of water that you're touching the earth. You cannot be touching concrete. That is not grounding.
Yes.
And so I think we've got, Stephen Sinatra, may he rest in peace, was an amazing cardiologist, has done a lot of work. I think he was one of the early adopters of this whole grounding philosophy. But we've got really good research on grounding. You have a study, don't you?
Yeah, I do. Right here. There. Yeah, okay. Multidisciplinary research has revealed that electrical conductive contact of the human body with the surface of the earth has effects that improve inflammation, immune system, wound healing, and prevention and treatment of chronic inflammatory and autoimmune diseases. Okay? And that wounds heal very differently, right? Yes. When the body is grounded, and it heals much faster. And I'll share this study with you guys in the show notes. But I mean, there's studies done that are proving that, like, the earth is here to heal us. The earth is like our mother. It wants to protect us and love on us. Yep. So, and it's free. It's free. It costs no money, and it costs little time. Yep. So,
Right. If you've ever wondered why going to the beach feels so good, right? I mean, not only because you're grounding, but the energy, literally the electrical energy that comes from the water and the sun has a profound impact. They have done studies on that as well, that when your feet are in the beach, in the water, and get that the red blood cell, the shape of our red blood cells and the activity of our red blood cells actually improves.
Interesting.
Yeah, there's been some research on that. So all of these things collectively, anti-inflammatory, anti-aging, right? You getting the gist here?
Yeah, and I think what's positive about all of this is that there's modifications, like simple modifications that we can do and implement to really minimize that inflammation storm that happens quite frequently to many people.
Yes. So let's talk about sleep, because I don't want to miss that.
Yeah. So I mean, I think it would be interesting to hear your take. I mean, obviously we know you need to sleep to heal, right? That's when healing happens. But like, and quality sleep, right? And getting to sleep at a certain time versus going to sleep at midnight and beyond, getting that by 10 a.m. to 2 a.m. so you get the melatonin, right? And all the benefits of that. So I'd be curious to hear from like a clinical standpoint, what you suggest with sleep and inflammation. So
we have to be sleeping, because we do know when we sleep, that is when the immune system recovers. Like, that's just, recovery happens when we're sleeping. That is the best anti-aging time of the day, right? And so why? Because when we're sleeping, melatonin is produced, and melatonin is a very, very, very powerful antioxidant. Melatonin will go in and scavenge those free radicals, those chemicals, those substances that are running around our body that are not supposed to be running around our body, right? So it's really, really powerful. But melatonin is really only produced between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. That's the window. I mean, give or take, but that is the window. And so if you are not sleeping in that time frame, right, then your body is not effectively or efficiently producing melatonin. And so if you are stressed and now you've got all of this cortisol and all of this adrenaline running through your body, you're going to have a hard time relaxing and so forth. But if you have a lot of those stress hormones running through your body, they will impact the release of melatonin as well, right? So that's also where stress comes into play. It will affect your sleep. That's why it affects your sleep, right? And then it subsequently affects hormones. So all of these women who are menopausal and now are waking up in the middle of the night, 2, 3, and then they're having a hot flash. It's some of it, yes, it's hormones, but the root cause of that is not just hormones, right? We're going back to stress and liver, and so there's a root cause to that. And I'm not saying it's not, yes, I said it's hormones, right? But melatonin is also a hormone. So we need to be implementing these other lifestyle things to ensure that we are sleeping. And if we're not sleeping, why are we not sleeping? Why are we not turning off our brain? Are you listening? Are you watching the news? Are you watching some scary movie, right? Something that's getting your adrenaline going. We do not want to get your adrenaline going before you go to bed. Have you eaten 2 to 3 hours before you went to bed? If you ate, your body is digesting and it's not resting. We need to be resting, not digesting.
No, you know what's so interesting about that? So I wear an Oura ring, which tracks my sleep. And, if I'm out of my routine and I'm out later, let's say it's like a gathering somewhere and I'm eating later than normal and then I go to bed, my resting heart rate always measures so high during sleep on those nights that I eat too close to bed, and my sleep is disrupted. Yeah. And my quality of sleep goes down significantly. Isn't that just
yes, I've done that. I mean, even where I not even have had, I haven't had anything with caffeine, I haven't had any chocolate. Maybe I had something that was a little too much or too sugary or whatever, and I don't sleep.
Interesting.
Right? I mean, so forget about the alcohol.
Oh yeah, forget about the alcohol.
Right, forget about what alcohol does to your sleep. That's a whole other story, right? The alcohol is a huge problem because it does alcohol will create inflammation. But so that's the sleep piece. Yeah.
And then lastly, I would say environment, right?
And that's a big piece.
It's a huge piece. And it's so interesting because everybody's perception of what environment means to them is different things. But when I'm thinking environment, I'm thinking a couple of things. I'm thinking is your environment toxic, right? And that could be in the form of a relationship. Is your house toxic? Does that make you not feel good when you're there? Are you so stressed out because you're in a partnership that maybe is a very toxic relationship? Or so that's one aspect of environment. But the other aspect, and that's a huge one, right? But then the other aspect is what are we consuming in our environment that might potentially be causing us to not feel well? Do we have Glades plugins and these synthetic fragrances? Are we cleaning our floors with these really
Fabuloso?
Strong,
Get that Fabuloso out of your house.
God, it's so
oh my
strong.
God, it's so bad.
Or cleaning your showers with bleach, and it's It's crazy. It's so pervasive, those scents, those fragrances, those chemicals. So, from that standpoint, those are the questions that I have with clients where we sit down and we really have these hard questions. Like, what are you cleaning your laundry with? Are you throwing, Tide in there and fabric softeners? And, all of these things contribute to imbalances in our body. And so, when you think about minimizing inflammation, you really have to think about it from this holistic standpoint. There's so many, thank goodness now people are realizing, they're waking up, right? That there are so many better brands, so many better products that we can easily swap out. And, we cross that bridge when we get there, but I just, I want you to know that there are these other areas that we might not be thinking about could be contributing. And, but easy swaps, not hard, doable, right?
Doable. And I think, again, it's not the idea of this, and talking about all of this is not to overwhelm you and go, wow, I have so many things that I have to pay attention to. It is a lot, and this is the unfortunate part of where we are, right? In this time and space of our culture, like the exposure. We never had so much exposure to these chemicals in our life. We wonder why we see high rates of cancers and different kinds of diseases and childhood cancers. Our environment is so toxic, and I'm not just talking about outside. I'm talking about inside our homes.
Right.
And so if we can do these small little things over time, and this is where the coaching is so beneficial, because it's little baby steps, and you make these swaps, and then all of a sudden you're not missing what you used to have that was toxic. And you realize that all of these things, when you're exposing yourself to products, these cleaning products that have chemicals, remember those chemicals inside your body does not know how to deal with them. That's the sandpaper. Like, if you can have a visual, I want you to walk away with the visual of what is causing this sandpaper-like activity in my body, on my arteries, on my organs, because all of those things become cumulative. So it's never just diet, it's never just sleep, it's never just stress. It is all of, like I said in the beginning, these cumulative things. But understand that we can target it one by one, because as you start to feel better, or as you start to notice the changes, you're going to want to continue, right? It's like you really are excited, like, oh wow, I'm feeling better, I'm seeing these changes, I want to go in this positive direction. So one or the other, we got a really good question, and I don't want to go too much more than an hour, but we got a great question about the link between the gut microbiome and inflammation. And what is that connection? And 100% there's a connection, right? What we eat has to be filtered by our liver and kidneys and all of that. But guess what? The tube that we eat in is at play here too. And so when we consume foods that have chemicals in them and toxins in them, it again acts like sandpaper in the gut. When we are eating processed foods, everything has to go through our intestines. And when we're exposed to things, even for a lot of people, gluten, even if you're not sensitive to gluten, the wheat grain, where, the wheat is so, has been so genetically modified and so hybridized and so devitalized that it really causes problem in, I don't care what kind of intestine you have. I don't care who, you say you can eat a bagel every day. Guess what? It's causing problem in your body because gluten is so detrimental to our gut microbiome. And in certain cases, right, processed dairy and processed foods and processed sugar, all the, the fast food that you're eating and all of those oils, like all of that has to go through your intestinal lining. And if it's like sandpaper in the lining of your intestine, guess what? You're creating inflammation there. And so what's going on inside the intestine is very much like what's going on in the organs. We are disrupting the good microbiome, the good bacteria, the good health of our body as we introduce all of these foreign substances and these foreign chemicals. So if we're depleting the good guys, who's fighting for us? We've got to make sure that those good guys, that immune system that lives, most of our immune system lives in the gut. If we're depleting that very basis of our immune system, who's there fighting? we got nobody fighting for us. So again, that inflammation in that gut will trickle out to other parts of the body. We know gut inflammation is very much tied to brain inflammation. And we see this in young kids. Kids with ADD, ADHD, kids on the spectrum, we know there's a gut-brain connection. And yet we feed our kids, I always call it the beige diet, like chicken fingers and macaroni and cheese, like gluten, processed stuff, sugar. Look at what we're feeding our young children. And we expect them to be healthy and perform and not be sick and pay attention.
Right.
I'm sorry, you just gave me all that sugar and all that crappy gluten, and I'm supposed to sit in a classroom and listen. I feel like we're these poor kids are fighting an uphill battle to some degree. So yes, the gut microbiome is directly linked to inflammation, and going back to the foods and even to the lifestyle piece is going to be super important. And eating the rainbow, making sure you're getting foods from different food groups and different colors, right? We hear, blueberries are so good. Everybody's out eating blueberries. Yes, they're amazing. But guess what? Watermelon is good, and pomegranates, and beets, and green leafies, and white, right? A lot of people, we were just talking about this. Like Amanda said to me, well, is a white daikon radish, or is cauliflower, or is like any of these white foods, are there, they're not deeply colored. Do they have antioxidants? Do they have benefits? Of course they do.
Yeah.
Right? And so a lot of those white foods, believe it or not, are really important for liver detoxification. Right? The cauliflower has sulforaphane in it. It's got all that good stuff in there that helps with detoxification. And there's other minerals and vitamins. There are tons of nutrition in our white food groups. So do not forget about the white food groups. Again, daikon radish is white, great for the liver. Garlic, onions, leeks, shallots, all of those white things, great for the immune system, great for the liver, right? So important to include all varieties of foods and get rid of the processed stuff. Anything else that we missed? Because God, this went so fast. I feel like we've just, kind of tried to get it all in.
I know. No, but a good tip and something I always try to encourage clients to do is when you go to the grocery store, if you go every week, pick one or two things from the week before that you didn't have to diversify what you're doing. And that could be not just fruits and vegetables. That could be spices, that could be tea, that can be herbs, and make sure they're organic tea, of course. But yeah, there's little tips and tricks you can do to try to diversify what you're doing. And yeah, I think hopefully this leaves you feeling empowered. We never want to just give you doom and gloom without course of, hope at the end of
some optimism in there,
Exactly.
right? And to your point, I just want to say something about herbs. We don't use herbs enough in this culture. And so things like ginger and turmeric, turmeric is one of the most powerful anti-inflammatories. Consume it. The more you consume it frequently, the better off your inflammation, the better off you'll be. And the body knows what to do with the root, right? Sometimes we take supplements. Are they good quality supplements? Do you even know where you're getting them from? That's a whole other thing, right? We hear about these antioxidants and these anti-inflammatory supplements. If you don't know what you're taking, why you're taking it, if you don't know the quality, this is it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. If you do not know what's in your supplements and the form of the nutrient, right? Turmeric comes in many forms. If you're not getting the active form, guess what? You're not going to get the benefits. Our B vitamins come in many forms. Our antioxidants come in many forms. If you're not getting the right form and the quality is not good and you don't know why or what you're taking, stop. Until you really know what you're doing, right? Because there are a lot of great supplements that are good for inflammation, but it also depends on what kind of inflammation, right? What's going on, and then we can target it a little bit better. So there was also a question about inflammation and supplements, and like I said, I think that is so highly individualistic, but I do think turmeric is a great one. I think we have to be careful with any of those, everybody who's out there taking the greens, and you know what I'm talking about. So can they be supportive? Yes. I think do you have to be beholden to taking a greens powder? It could be adjunctive. Some of them are very expensive. They have a lot in them. And some of them are good quality. I'm not saying they're not, but I think they're expensive and you can get just as much. Look, go juice a few greens. It'll be less expensive and you'll get way more bioavailability out of it than just taking a powder. So, I think there's a time and a place for that, but we just have to be careful. I'm always that person, just don't be that avid always consumer. You hear a infomercial and you're the first person on it, right? We hear that all the time. Be a little skeptical. have a little bit of a question. Take a step back and don't just listen. Remember, that's good marketing. Someone's getting paid a lot of money to sell you that product, okay? So, be careful about that. But as always, keep the questions coming. Like, subscribe, comment, because that's what keeps us going and keeps this going, and sharing this amazing information with you guys. We love doing it, and I think that's a wrap for today. I mean, lots that we can continue to talk about. You know, this could be hours long, but I don't think anybody wants to listen to us continue to talk about it. So that's all for today. This is Amanda.
Yes.
And your Rebel Nutritionist signing off. Make it a great day, everybody.